Evolve Beyond Borders is proud to introduce Dimitris Papageorgiou, partner at KPMG. Dimitris is a renowned subject matter expert with over 2 decades of industry experience. He is a transformative leader, GPHR certified, specializing in HR and payroll transformation, HR shared services creation and delivery, HR compliance, global payroll, and mobility. Let's welcome Dimitris as he shares his insights on pay transparency. How will transparency change how we attract, recruit, and reward talent around the world?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Dimitris Papageorgiou. I am a partner with KPMG in the Human Capital Advisory practice, and I focus on global payroll, HR transformation, and workforce management. You're joining us today for a presentation on pay transparency and how it will change the world of HR as we know it. Before we commence with pay transparency, let me provide a little bit of context as to how we got here. As global economies began to recover from the financial crisis of 2007-2008, followed by the European debt crisis of 2009-2010, we entered the dawn of the fourth industrial revolution. Albeit with great hopes, digitalization became the mantra for many of us in a race to migrate to the cloud and automate as much as possible. The newly created capacity gave rise to concepts such as purpose, empathy, and digital experience. But it also made clear through connected data and social media that we were fundamentally flawed in the way we treat talent across many organizations. Pay inequality became evident, and our inability to expeditiously close a long-standing gender pay gap became evident. People are now connecting at levels not previously seen, thanks to social media. What we in HR and for many organizations was perceived as competitive advantage and proprietary information, such as compensation and job skills, became public knowledge and a crowdsourcing benchmarking collective. I believe the time is now for pay transparency, and I hope that you will enjoy the rest of the presentation. The new work covenant equals trust. You will see here that we have this slide that says great reconciliation, and that great reconciliation is a combination of all the things that have happened in the last 3-4 years. Quiet quitting, hybrid workforce, great resignation, tech layoffs, quiet hiring. Some of it part of the COVID-19 pandemic, some of it actually part of the, I would say, very expeditious growth that we experienced in the last decade or so. The greater considerations has also changed the way that employees engage with their organizations. An organization's environmental, social, and governance commitment is now part of the employee value proposition. And we are seeing this in levels of significance never before seen. It has become a new covenant that nurtures loyalty and fosters retention. At the core, though, of this new covenant between employees and employers, we are seeing that trust is the catalyst and accelerator to yield long-term success. The question becomes, do you trust your employer? Before you answer the question above, let's reverse the question. Does your employer trust you? And what does that trust mean for you? For some, it could be hybrid work arrangements. We have seen hybrid work arrangements become a mainstay for us during the pandemic. But as the pandemic started fading, they stayed. Those hybrid work arrangements have stayed for many of us. And it could be an indication of trust that your employer feels that you will do what you're expected to do, regardless of your whereabouts. It could be enablement versus supervision. We enable individuals to do the work that they're expected to do versus supervise them and micromanage them in order to get that work done. It could be a promotion. For some of us, attaining a higher level in the organization may be an indication of trust. It could be investment in your ideas, actually welcoming your ideas, soliciting those ideas, and then investing in those ideas. And lastly, it could simply be continuous employment. You being able to stay employed at an organization, regardless of the conditions of the organization, in terms of financial prosperity, could be an indication of trust. Fact is, we all interpret trust in our own way. But transparency around rewards, decisions, plans, aspirations is what allows us to, in essence, calibrate and refine what that trust is and whether or not that trust is placed with the right supervisor, employer, or company. What is pay transparency? Pay transparency is not a recent trend in terms of a notion, but definitely a recent trend in terms of legislation. We've always asked and would like to have known more as we negotiate new positions, whether we are a new entrant in an organization or transferring internally. But that information or the assumption that we had around what the position was possible to pay was based on network, feedback from a recruiter, but never something that was actually formally given. What we consider pay transparency today is the process of companies being candid and upfront about the remuneration made available to candidates and employees. In essence, you are given clear and, I would say, precise information around the range available to a given position. So it's upon you to determine whether or not that position pays what you would like to be paid for the work that is being asked to be performed, and also know how you would like to negotiate given the range of that position. Why is it happening now? Well, pay transparency is low in several federal, state, and local jurisdictions around the globe. Many countries have actually legislated to promote the closing of the gender pay gap, and we are seeing this adoption also happening in the US. Lastly, pay transparency is part of a new covenant between employers and employees. I think we are pivoting to an era where trust is going to be paramount as to how we interact in organizations, employees and employers. And pay transparency is going to be the catalyst to facilitate that. The last thing that I would want to mention on pay transparency in this particular slide is the notion that pay transparency is not meant to do anything more than provide equal pay for work of equal value. This is not about discriminating one way or the other. It is truly about promoting equal pay for work of equal value. You will ask, how will it change our industries? And it will. There is no doubt about it. In the HR space, we will see that recruiting will actually become a much more clearly defined process from a job roles perspective, and will probably lead to higher retention, since individuals will accept positions with more information made available to them as to what's possible and how it actually works. Rewards for said positions, and in most organizations, will become simpler because it will not be considered a unique value proposition for individuals, given that we will be transparent as to how we remunerate and reward high performers. And as such, it will probably lead to simpler compensation structures. Policies, which are the genesis of many things within HR, will no longer be gender-based on benefits or hindrances. When we have parental leave, it will just be that, parental leave. It will not be maternity leave or paternity leave. Succession planning will be objective and fact-based decision-making. So as you see, the theme here is pay transparency will actually influence many other activities that are not necessarily pay-related within HR and promote that new covenant of trust between employees and employers. From a payroll perspective, it should lead to complexity reduction as a result of the simplification of the processes that are payroll conducive. It will promote pay clarity. Individuals will know what they're being paid, why they're being paid, and how they're being paid. And lastly, it should lead to less errors and omissions. Anytime that you have a simpler process, it should be easier to manage and reduce or eliminate errors. So overall, we are seeing that we are trending towards easier interpreted sets of data from HR and payroll as a result of pay transparency. And the fundamental, I would say, theme here will be trust. We will have to trust our employer that the information that is being made available to us is accurate, true, and reflective of what we're being told. And the employers will have to trust us in terms of understanding that we have our best interest is aligned with the organization's best interest, and we are both striving towards high performance and success. Why would you say it's happening now? As I mentioned earlier, it is not a new thing. Pay transparency has always been a desire, I would say, by many, but it's definitely happening now. Well, as you will see here, if we don't promote pay transparency, we will continue having disengaged workers in many organizations. Disengaged workers tend to lead to an approximate 18% lost productivity in terms of cost of their annual salary. That is a very significant number from an SG&A perspective for most organizations. And it's very easy to recapture if you actually can get those employees to re-engage with the organization. The second thing is that we have seen, based on research, that replacing workers is an expensive undertaking. Every time that you lose an employee, you lose the skills that that employee had, the experience that they had in the position, and then you actually have to onboard somebody new, train them until they become effective and efficient in the position that they now have assumed, which is a costly undertaking. And that cost is usually 2x of their annual salary. Additionally, if we don't do this as organizations, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. As I mentioned earlier, we have legislation that it's now mandating this to happen in certain jurisdictions, localities, and countries. But in addition to that, we have social media. And social media is probably where we first pioneered the notion of transparency through anonymity. Because you will see here, I have 3 applications: Fishbowl, Blind, and Glassdoor. And if you're an HR professional and you're not familiar with them, I suggest you become. There are professional type of applications, so somebody has to be verified through the corporate email address in order to be accepted in those communities. But you will see that every time that an organization goes through a merit cycle, a mid-year change in compensation, forums will be created and individuals will start benchmarking themselves in terms of jobs, levels, and compensation. So it is a process that it's happening, and that's why I mentioned earlier the crowdsourcing benchmarking. It's out there, and it's in our best interest to actually accept that it's there and facilitate it in a much more professional manner that it happens by anonymized individual information. What does it mean for us, for you? The first question that has to be asked is, are your policies compliant across all jurisdictions that have enacted pay transparency and pay equity laws and legislation? Most recent one in the US is California. Colorado had it for a while. New York as well. And if you will now see job postings stemming from organizations in those states or posted in those states, they will provide actually a range of pay upfront. As you also know, in the US, organizations are no longer allowed to ask what your prior compensation was. They can ask what you desire to get paid, but they cannot ask what you were being paid in the past. The second question that you have to ask is, are your systems capable of handling the new transparent workflows? Due to the level of openness that it will foster, we probably will have to tweak our employee self-service, our manager self-service capabilities, and what is being made viewable and accessible by everyone. Lastly, you have to ask whether or not your teams are trained and able to operate in a very different internal and external environment. As I mentioned previously, recruiting, rewards, benefits, life cycle of employee type of workflows will change. And the corresponding change has to happen with us in the way that we understand those processes and operate with our systems. Will it be enough? That is probably a question that has been asked, at least in the US, since 1963, when the Equal Pay Law went into place. If it was enough to simply legislate on these things, then I would say we wouldn't be seeing a gender pay gap in the US of $18 per $100 of wages earned. What that means is, for every $100 that a man is paid for the same job, the same skills, the same position, a woman actually receives $18 less. So legislation by itself is not enough. We know that on average, women globally are paid approximately 20% less than men per the International Labor Organization. And we also know that change is not easy for many to absorb, whether it's a societal norm or an organizational change that is expected. But it has to start with each and every one of us. We need to become agents of change, catalysts towards the adoption and improvement of processes associated with pay transparency, and promote the desire as well as the benefit that ensues from it. And is there a benefit, you would say? Absolutely. According to McKinsey, study from McKinsey, we will have about $13 trillion of gain by 2030 in global economic growth. Should we increase male to female employment parity from 0.61 to 0.71? $13 trillion may not, or may look as a very large number or very, very small number. It depends on how you see it. But if you consider that the global economy today is approximately 110 trillion, that is actually a 10% improvement with nothing else than doing nothing else, but simply paying equal pay for work of equal value. So it is what it needs to happen. It's only fair that we all are paid based on the value we create, not on our gender, not on any other factor that determines our pay. And it will have a very significant impact on the global economy. As I mentioned, pay transparency is a growing theme that you will see going forward. And it's only going to increase. The tendencies in the US, when a few states adopt, it spreads out and eventually becomes a national thing. And I would expect that the same stands true for many European countries and across the Pacific as well. We definitely have seen legislation around equal pay in jurisdictions like Singapore and Australia. With that said, we need to be ready. We need to become agents of that change, and we need to embrace the fact that we are moving into a world that we no longer manage organizations with an outlook of 5 to 10 years, but it's a much shorter outlook with a lot more unpredictable factors to be accounted for. So let's remove pay as one of the inhibitors in our growth and our collaboration between organizations and employees. And let's make sure that equal pay is paid for equal value. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.